CGC and CBCS have been at war for years, but all of a sudden, there is now a new opponent on the battlefield. PSA has entered the comic book grading wars, and in a tale as old as time, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and now CGC and CBCS have united in their efforts to drive PSA out of that market. Now, the only question is, are they simply doing that independently of each other? Or might there be some collusion going on? Well, today I'm going to talk about why they are working so hard to put PSA out of the market and why it's at least within the realm of possibility that there may be some collusion. So how did we get to this point? Well, PSA has been the market leader in grading sporting cards for years, but they recently made the announcement that they are going to enlarge their territory and start grading comic books as well. Now, some people think this is a retaliatory move against CGC, because as you might know, CGC is the market leader in grading comic books, but a couple of years ago, they made the decision that they were going to start stepping into PSA's territory and grading some sporting cards. And it's definitely within the realm of possibility that PSA said, oh, you're going to come and get us? Well, we are coming after you, CGC, and now we are coming after your comic books. Well, unfortunately for CBCS, I think they might be some collateral damage. And in fact, I think they are going to be hurt by PSA more than CGC is. So why is that? Well, I'll give you 3 reasons. Number 1, for years, CGC and CBCS have been the clear 2 market leaders in grading comic books. There are some other companies like PGX and EGS, but they don't grade nearly the amount of books that these 2 companies do. However, CGC is the clear leader among the 2. It's estimated they grade about 3 million comic books a year, and CBCS doesn't release their statistics, so we don't know exactly how many they grade. I've seen a lot of people say that CGC grades 10 times as many as CBCS, and I don't know if that's true, but I'm going to be generous to say CBCS and say they grade 1/3 of the comic books of CGC. So let's say CGC grades 3 million comic books. Well, that means CBCS would then grade 1 million comic books. Well, let's say PSA enters this market, and we don't know how well they're going to do, but they have a big reputation in the sporting cards market, and so there's a lot of people who are interested in trying them out. And so let's say their first year of business, they end up grading 500,000 comic books. And let's just, in this imaginary scenario, say they take equal business from CGC and CBCS, so that each of those companies loses 250,000 comic books worth of business. Well, for CGC, that's a little bit less than 10% of their business, and that is nothing to sneeze at. But for CBCS, that would be a full-on 25% of their business. So they stand to lose a much larger portion of their business, and that's if the same number of customers come from each organization to PSA. But my second point is I think, and of course this is just speculation, CBCS actually stands to lose a much higher number of customers than CGC, because a huge part of their customer base, and we don't really know how much, let's just say 50%, aren't necessarily pro-CBCS, but they're anti-CGC. And since CBCS has been the only reasonable alternative to CGC, then they've built up a customer base. But all of a sudden, if you have another real alternative to CGC, well, you might see this 50% or whatever it might be say, hey, let's check out this other company. I don't necessarily love CBCS, and let's see what PSA has to offer. On the other hand, CGC's customers, I think, tend to be more loyal to them, because if they were already discontent enough with CGC to leave, then they would have already gone to CBCS. Now, again, we're talking about generalities. There will certainly be some number of people that will go to PSA from CGC, but I think a huge number of the people who are ready to leave CGC have already gone. And so they're going to stick with CGC, at least in the near future, until PSA perhaps proves that their books can sell for as much as CGC books can. But that's going to take months, maybe years to determine. But in the short term, I think these people who are, again, already have left CGC will not have a problem checking out PSA. Now, obviously, it's not going to be everybody, but some bigger percentage of people, I think, are ready to go from CBCS than they are from CGC. Now, a third reason why CBCS is hurt by the PSA news more than CGC is because of the poaching of talent. As you might have seen, CBCS's former head grader, Mark Wilson, has left the company to become the head grader at PSA. And man, you want to talk about shots fired, those are some shots fired. And not only is that just bad in and of itself, but moves like that can really hurt morale at a company. I mean, you're looking to your leaders to steady you. When the PSA moves come out, everybody's looking to, hey, Mark Wilson, let us know it's going to be okay. They're not going to take us. We're still the best company, right, Mark? Well, all of a sudden, when he starts bailing, then the other people have to start thinking, hey, man, is this the right company to be a part of? Is this ship sinking? We're in trouble. And so do all of a sudden other CBCS employees start looking to go to PSA or CGC? Who knows? But I believe this is one of the reasons why CBCS has become more aggressive in this grading war, especially against PSA. As you might have recently seen, they have now filed a lawsuit against Mark Wilson and another former employee who was at least rumored to be going to PSA. There's some confusion about that. But they filed a lawsuit saying that they stole trade secrets. And this is going to be a battle in the courts for probably some period of time, unless they reach some kind of settlement out of court. So what's either going to happen, it seems, and I think they filed an injunction against Mark Wilson so that he can't actually start working. I think he's going to contest it. There's all this legal stuff that's got to be sorted out. But of course, CBCS is doing their best to handicap PSA so they can't really get off the ground and or get some money from PSA so that they can keep going on. Now, CGC hasn't fired nearly as big of a shot at PSA. And that might be because they're just so focused on getting their own act together after the last 12 months. And maybe they realize, hey, we've got the brand name. We're CGC. As long as we put out a good product, we'll maintain our customer base. And so the best thing that we can do is not even get involved in this PSA drama, but instead just focus on making a good product and we'll retain our customers. We're the market leader and we'll remain that way as long as we don't keep putting out these disastrous things that I've talked about in some of my most recent videos. Well, I don't believe it's that simple because I have heard from one of the founder of CBCS of some of the dastardly things CGC did back in the day to try to keep them out of comic conventions and things like that. And of course, there's new leadership, so maybe nothing nefarious is going on, but maybe it is. Who knows? Especially, I saw Mark Wilson's son, Dave, who runs a YouTube channel, Comic Book Investments. One of the first channels I started watching when I got back into collecting. Recommend his channel. But one of the things, of course, he's defending his dad. A lot of people have thoughts on that. But one of the things he said is this is a stupid move from CBCS because, the only winners are really going to be the lawyers. They're going to get a ton of money from CBCS and PSA, and CBCS is going to just be stuck with this great bill. Well, let's put on our tinfoil hats for a minute. So what if Matt Nelson from CGC put in a phone call to CBCS and said, hey, what can we do to work together to get rid of PSA? And CBCS says, well, hey, man, we're cash strapped. And what if CGC said, hey, well, we can fund your legal bills, but you just keep launching these attacks from PSA. Perhaps CBCS is serving in a proxy war between CGC and PSA. Now, again, that's a tinfoil hat theory. But the more I read about lots of things, the more I see collusion and conspiracies everywhere. Even as you might have seen recently in the news with P. Diddy, just some horrible, terrible stuff. And that sent me down a rabbit hole of reading different information and seeing some rappers like Ice Cube, and I think this is reported in the New York Times, discussed like how in the, I guess the 80s and 90s, the owners of certain record labels were also the owners of certain private prisons. And so there's speculation that they funneled gangster rap into the popular mainstream culture so that communities would glorify crime and violence and all this stuff and it seemed cool. And then that would feed in to the prison system. And so that then these, corporate, people would be making money on music and prisons. Man, yeah. Look it up. Look it up. I don't, it's uncertain whether that's true, but there's a lot of people who talk about things like that. And, and the older I get, the more I see, hey, when money is involved, crazy things happen. Alliances form that you wouldn't expect. And so could there be an alliance here? Could there be a treaty here that's made temporarily until PSA is kicked out of the battlefield? And then maybe they go on to say, okay, now we can be back at war. And something else that has been making me think about this seemingly impossible alliance is professional wrestling. As many of you know, I'm a huge fan of professional wrestling, see a lot of parallels between comics and wrestling. Well, for about 15 years, there were two main companies, two market leaders. You have the WWE, which I'll equate to CGC as the main leader in their market, and then you had TNA, which I'll equate to CBCS as the clear second leader in the market. Well, about 5 years ago, all of a sudden, another wrestling company burst onto the scene, and that was AEW. Now, before AEW burst on the scene, there was a real war that would go on between WWE and TNA. I mean, I remember clearly when Kurt Angle all of a sudden showed up at TNA and you saw shots fired, and you would never imagine those two companies working together until all of a sudden a new competitor entered into the battlefield. And recently, these two organizations have been working together, sharing talent. You've got TNA wrestlers showing up on WWE shows, WWE shows showing up on TNA, and they're collaborating because they both have an incentive to push AEW out of the market. And they want to go back to the status quo of WWE being number one and TNA being a comfortable number two. Because when AEW came on the scene, it didn't actually hurt WWE that much. In fact, WWE's gotten better because the competition forced them to get their product to be better. But TNA really suffered. They went from being the clear number two to not being much at all right now. And I think that's kind of what's going on with these grading wars. I think CGC, I think they're going to be just fine. And I think competition will help them improve, just like it did the WWE. But CBCS is the one that's really going to be hurting. Now, the WWE really wants to, again, push everybody out. They want to kick AEW out, just like CGC wants to kick PSA out. And so will these two companies collaborate just like WWE and TNA? Who knows? I don't know, but stranger things have happened. Now, you might say, well, hey, CBCS hasn't simply been striking at PSA. They made some tongue-in-cheek, funny posts when it came to Bananagate. They mocked CGC. Clearly, they're not working together. Well, with my tinfoil hat, you don't want to be too obvious that you're working with your supposed enemy. So these were maybe some lighthearted posts to make it look like they're still competitors, when in fact, collusion is going on. I don't know, crazy to think about. I think it's fun to think about. Just, I like finding parallels in all kinds of industries with each other. Now, you tell me, is there a chance the CGC and CBCS could be working together to drive out PSA? Or do you think that's just a tinfoil hat theory? If you think it's possible, put a 1 in the comments. If you think that's crazy, put a 2. Let me know. Now, whether or not they actually are working together, PSA is bad news for both companies, but like I said, I think especially CBCS. So I think it would be worthwhile for them to be making calls to each other and consider working together in some capacity. Now, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, of course, I'd appreciate it if you consider doing so now. Like, comment, thank you.